The folder hit the floor at his boots and split open, and there it was, in black and white. Someone inside the palace had sold Princess Charlotte. Tonight. Little Prince George had grabbed it off a desk and run. He was 10. He was shaking. He didn't understand what he'd found, but the guard did, in one glance. They'd sent the real protection home, cleared the gate, thought of everything except the silent man on the door they'd all walked past for 4 nights. They were about to find out he was the last thing they should have left standing. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? Hit subscribe, because tonight the man they called Nobody becomes the only thing between a little girl and the dark. The corridor outside the household offices was the kind of post that put younger men to sleep on their feet. Sergeant Owen Marsh had never once been in danger of it. He stood where the East Administrative Wing narrowed toward the Comptroller's suite, boots on the polished floor, and he watched the evening thin out the way it always did, the clerks leaving in 1s and 2s, the light in the tall windows going from gold to grey to the flat black of a castle at night. It was past 7. The ceremonial part of the day was long over. This was the quiet, clerical underside of the palace, where nothing happened that anyone would ever film, and Marsh had drawn it for the 4th night running without complaint. He didn't shift his weight, he didn't check the clock, though he always knew what it said. He simply stood and watched, and if you had passed him, you would have seen exactly what everyone saw when they passed him: a large, still, unremarkable man in uniform, part of the furniture of the place, no more worth a second glance than the doorframe he stood beside. That was, in fact, the point, though no one passing him knew that yet. A clerk came out of the records room with an armful of box files and nodded at him without really seeing him. Marsh gave the small, acknowledging tilt of the chin that the household expected, and nothing more. He noted, without appearing to note anything, that the man was carrying Thursday's archival returns on a Tuesday, which meant someone upstairs had asked for them out of sequence. He filed it. He filed most things. It was a habit that looked, from the outside, like boredom, and was in fact the opposite. The suite door at the end of the corridor opened and closed twice in the next half hour. The Deputy Comptroller's people working late. That in itself was nothing. The Deputy Comptroller's people were forever working late, and Nigel Ashworth ran his office like a man who believed the palace would fall down without him personally holding up a wall of it. Marsh had watched that office keep strange hours all week. He had drawn his own quiet conclusions about the hours and said nothing to anyone, because saying nothing to anyone was, at present, the whole of his job. Then a junior aide crossed the far end of the corridor, moving quickly, and handed something through the suite door to a hand that reached out to take it, and Marsh's eyes, which did not move fast, moved fast. It was a folder, black, unmarked. No department flash, no reference tab, none of the color coding the household put on everything it touched, because the household could not resist labeling its own paper. A black folder with nothing on it was not a household folder. It was a folder that did not want to be one of many. It went through the door, and the door closed, and the corridor was quiet again, and any other guard on any other night would have already forgotten it. Marsh did not forget it. He stood exactly as still as before, chin level, hands loose, the very picture of a man thinking about nothing at all. Inside, without a single muscle betraying it, he had set the black folder down carefully in the part of his mind where he kept the things that were wrong, and he waited, patient, unmoving, ordinary, to see whether the night would give him a reason to pick it back up. The night was about to give him several. He heard the boy before he saw him. Not footsteps this time, a smaller sound, a door easing shut somewhere it shouldn't have, then quick, light steps trying very hard to be quiet and not managing it, the way children's feet never quite manage it. Marsh didn't turn. He let the sound come to him, reading it the way he read everything. Young, small, moving fast, moving scared. Not playing. There was no play in that rhythm. Prince George came around the corner at the dark end of the corridor and stopped dead when he saw the guard. He was in the soft clothes he'd have been put in for the evening, not the pressed things of the daytime, which meant he'd left where he was supposed to be. He was 10 years old and doing his level best to look like a boy who had every right to be exactly where he was, and failing because his face was white and his eyes were too wide and he was holding something against his chest with both arms, the way you hold a thing you know you're not allowed to have. A folder, black, unmarked, the same one. Or its twin. Marsh's stomach went cold and level all at once, the way it used to before things, a long time ago, in a life the palace didn't know he'd had. "Your Royal Highness," Marsh said, low, even. He did not move toward the boy, because a large man moving toward a frightened child only makes a smaller, faster frightened child. "You're up late." George opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His arms tightened on the folder, his eyes flicked back over his shoulder, down the dark corridor he'd come from, and that single backward glance told Marsh more than any sentence. The boy wasn't sneaking a treat or wandering after a bad dream. He was running from something, and he'd run to the first grown-up in a uniform he could find, and now that he'd found him, he'd lost his nerve about what to say. "It's all right," Marsh said. "You can stand here. No one's going to make you go anywhere." George took a step toward him, then another. And on the third step his foot caught the edge of the runner, or his hands were simply shaking too hard, and the folder slipped. It hit the stone and split open, and its contents fanned out across the polished floor between them. Marsh looked down. He did not crouch. He did not snatch at the pages. He stood exactly as he was and read what was face up in the light, fast and silent, the way you read a map when the shooting hasn't started yet but is going to. A schedule, times down the left margin, tonight's date at the top. A movement plan. The household laid its movement plans out in a format he'd seen 1,000 times, and this was that format, which meant this had been made inside. A line about a goodwill exchange and a delegation reception, phrased in the bloodless language of protocol, and a name, printed plainly in a column where it had no business being, in the row for a movement scheduled after midnight. Charlotte. Marsh's face did not change. This was the thing that people who had known him in his other life would have recognized, and the household never would. That the stiller Owen Marsh went, the worse the thing in front of him was. And he had gone very still. "George," he said, and his voice was so calm it made the boy's shoulders drop half an inch. "Where did you get this?" George's chin trembled. "I wasn't looking," he whispered. I heard them talking about Charlotte, and about tonight, and about people coming to take—" He stopped. His breath hitched. "I don't understand it. But it's bad, isn't it? It's really bad." Marsh looked at the pages on the floor. At one word, and one time, and one date. "Yes," he said quietly. "It is." The first thing was the boy. Everything else came second. "Pick nothing up," Marsh said. "Leave it exactly where it is, and come and stand here, on this side of me, with your back to the wall." George obeyed the way children obey when a calm adult finally tells them precisely what to do. Instantly, gratefully. He put his back to the cool stone at Marsh's left, half behind him, and Marsh shifted a quarter turn so that his body closed the boy off from the length of the dark corridor. Only then, with George anchored, did he lower himself on one knee to the scattered pages. Not to gather them, but to read them, quickly, in the order they'd fallen, the way you'd read the ground for tracks. And the horror came up off the floor in pieces. It wasn't a leak. He understood that in the first 10 seconds. A leak was a single stolen document, a careless copy. This was a plan, built, staged, formatted in the household's own hand, with the confident tidiness of something that had been in preparation for weeks. There were logistics. There was a timeline that ran in 15-minute increments from 10 o'clock tonight to a movement scheduled for a quarter past midnight. There were roles, unnamed but numbered, the way you number a team when you don't want names on paper, and threaded all the way through it, dressed in the softest possible language, was the thing itself. A goodwill placement, a private continuation of the young princess's education abroad. A delegation arriving under a diplomatic courtesy that would move through the East Gate on a cleared list, during a window when, and here Marsh's jaw set by a fraction of a millimetre, the genuine protection detail had been rostered down for the night on a paperwork technicality that only someone senior in the household could have arranged. The real guns, sent home early on an order that would look, on paper, entirely routine. They weren't smuggling a child past the palace's defences, they were switching the defences off from the inside and walking her out the front, wrapped in protocol so thick that anyone who tried to stop it would look like the one breaking the rules. Somebody had sold Princess Charlotte, and they had built the sale to look like a state occasion. Marsh's eyes went to the authorising line at the foot of the master schedule, where the household required a senior signatory to sign off any movement of a principal. He already half knew what he'd find. He found it. N. Ashworth, Deputy Comptroller, the man whose suite door was 30 feet away, the man whose people had been working strange hours all week, the man who ran his office like the palace would fall without him, because it turned out he'd been quietly arranging to knock a piece of it down. George. Marsh kept his voice flat and warm at once. Did anyone see you take this? I don't think so. The boy's whisper shook. The door was open. They were in the other room. I heard Charlotte's name, and I got scared, and I took it and I ran. His eyes filled. Was that wrong? I didn't know what to do. It was the bravest thing anyone in this palace has done all year, Marsh said, and meant it so plainly that the boy believed him. Don't ever think otherwise. He looked back at the pages, and there was one more thing, a small thing, a detail his eyes snagged on and wouldn't let go of. In the margin of the movement plan, beside the rostered-down window, someone had scrawled a note in shorthand, a clearance reference, and a two-word phrase, Nightingale, cold, the sort of operational marker used to signal that a route was confirmed clear of live security. Marsh looked at that phrase for a long moment. Something moved behind his still face that had nothing to do with the palace at all, a recognition, the reader could see, that he did not explain. He had seen markers like that before. He had set markers like that before, somewhere, in the life the household had never once thought to ask him about, when they'd assigned a quiet, unremarkable man to a quiet, unremarkable door. He didn't say any of it. He gathered the pages now, carefully, in order, evidence, and stood, and put himself fully between Prince George and the dark. midnight. He checked the clock in his head. 5 hours. 5 hours, and one man on a door that everyone walked past without seeing. It would, he thought, have to be enough. Every instinct the household had drilled into Owen Marsh told him what to do next. You did not act on your own initiative. You reported. You keyed your radio. You passed it up the chain. You let the structure above you take the weight and make the decisions, because the structure was wiser and larger than any one man on any one door. That was the oath under the oath. Observe, report, defer. Do not, under any circumstances, become the thing that moves. Marsh stood over a stolen plan to sell a 9-year-old girl to strangers before dawn, signed by the second most powerful administrator in the building, and he understood that every channel the oath told him to use ran straight back through the man who'd signed it. Report it up the household chain, and it would reach Ashworth's own office, or an office Ashworth had spent 30 years befriending, and by the time it worked its way to anyone clean, the delegation would be through the East Gate, and Charlotte would be a diplomatic fact on foreign soil, impossible to walk back without an incident no government would want. The compromised chain wasn't a risk. It was the whole mechanism of the crime. To use it was to hand the plan back to the people running it, gift-wrapped, with the one witness's name attached. So Owen Marsh did the thing he had sworn 12 years never to do. He stopped being furniture. It happened without drama, which was the strangest part. No jolt, no visible decision, just a small settling in the big man's shoulders, the way a tool comes to weight in a hand that has held it before. He looked down the corridor once, both ways, reading the sight lines, the doors, the dead zones between the cameras that he happened to know were there because he had spent 4 nights on this post, learning them without ever appearing to look. He looked at the suite door 30 feet away and calculated how long the office behind it would take to notice a black folder was missing. Not long. They'd already be looking. A plan this tight would have a man assigned to nothing but the folder's safety, and that man would have discovered by now that the boy had it. Which meant they were already coming. George! He crouched again, quick, level with the boy's frightened eyes. Listen to me exactly. I'm going to move you somewhere safe, right now, and I need you to be as quiet and as fast as you were when you ran here. Can you do that? George nodded hard. Good lad. You don't talk to anyone but me. If anyone else tells you to come with them, anyone, however important they look, however kind they sound, you don't. You come to me or you come to your father, and no one in between. Understand? My father, George whispered. Can we get to my father? That, said Marsh, is exactly where we're going, because that was the one clean line left. Not the household, not the offices, the boy's father, and, behind the boy's father, the genuine protection apparatus that answered to the family and not to the comptroller's suite. Ashworth had rostered down the guns and switched off the corridor, but he could not switch off the Prince of Wales, and he could not, Marsh was betting his life, have gotten to everyone. He moved George to the recessed doorway of the records room, solid, defensible, off the main line, and put the boy behind it. He kept the folder inside his own tunic, flat against his chest. Then he reached for his radio, and paused, because a normal ceremonial guard, at this exact moment, would have broadcast a general alarm on the open household channel, the channel Ashworth's people were certainly listening to. A normal guard would have announced his own position and his own intentions to the very men hunting the folder. Marsh did not key the open channel. His thumb moved instead to a second frequency, one that wasn't on the standard set, one a door guard had no reason to know, let alone hold, and he sent 4 words, clipped and flat, in a voice that for the first time all night sounded like it had done this before. Nightingale is not cold. Then he clipped the radio down, turned to face the dark corridor, and waited for the men who were coming for the boy. They came the way professionals come, not running, not shouting, but fast and low and certain. 2 men in the dark clothes of plainclothes security, moving up the corridor from the suite end, with the folder-shaped purpose of men who knew exactly what they'd lost and exactly who had it. Marsh had put himself in the middle of the corridor's narrowest point, where the walls came in and only one man could pass him at a time. He'd chosen it 4 nights ago without knowing why. He knew why now. Sergeant, the lead man's voice was reasonable, low, meant to carry no further than the 2 of them. Palace trained, one of Ashworth's. There's a document missing from the Deputy Comptroller's office. Sensitive. We think the boy took it. We'll take it and the boy off your hands, and we'll all forget the paperwork. We'll all forget the paperwork. Marsh had heard that exact music once before tonight, in his head, reading a plan built to look like a courtesy. No boy here, Marsh said. No document. Quiet post. The man's eyes moved, to the records room doorway, to the set of Marsh's shoulders, to the flat calm of the guard's face, and Marsh watched him decide that the guard was lying, and decide, in the same instant, that the guard was going to be a problem. His hand drifted toward his coat. Marsh moved before the hand got there. He did not draw a weapon. He did not strike to hurt for the sake of it. He crossed the 2 feet between them and took the reaching wrist and turned it, using the man's own forward motion, and put him hard into the wall. One clean redirection, the kind that ends a thing before it becomes a fight. The man hit the stone, breath gone, and Marsh had the coat open and the concealed radio out and crushed under his boot before the second man had finished processing that his partner was down. The second man came fast. Marsh gave ground on purpose, drawing him past the doorway where George hid, keeping the boy always at his back and out of the line, and when the man committed, Marsh caught the arm, rolled the elbow, and folded him down to the floor in a control hold that pinned without breaking. A takedown that contained a threat rather than ended a life, executed with an economy that no ceremonial posting had ever taught anyone. He held the man there, face to the cold stone, and leaned his weight into it, and spoke very quietly into his ear. "Your window's 15 minutes wide," Marsh said. "It just got narrower." Because that was the real weapon, and he knew it, even with 2 men down at his feet, not his hands. The clock, a plan this precise, had no slack in it. The delegation timed to the rostered down window, the gate cleared for an exact span, the whole thing a chain of moments that had to fall in order. Every minute Marsh stole, every man he took off the board, was a minute the plan couldn't get back. Ashworth wasn't fighting a guard, he was fighting a schedule, and the schedule was starting to come apart in his hands. Marsh secured the second man's wrists with his own belt, took his radio, and stood. 2 down. The corridor his, the folder against his chest, the boy safe behind him. For one breath it held. Then, from the sweet end of the corridor, a door opened, and a voice he'd heard through 30 feet of wall all week came down the hall. Smooth, senior, entirely unhurried. The voice of a man who had never in his life had a plan go wrong that he couldn't smooth back into shape. Sergeant Marsh. Nigel Ashworth stepped into the light. Immaculate, a slim man with a comptroller's soft hands and a delegation of dark-suited figures behind him. You've made a considerable mistake. And behind Ashworth, between 2 of the strangers, walking sleepy and confused in the soft clothes she'd been woken in, one small hand held by a woman she didn't know, was Princess Charlotte. They had already gone to fetch her. The handoff was not 5 hours away. It was now. And they were walking her straight toward the east gate, straight toward the cleared list and the waiting cars, straight through the one narrow point in the corridor, where a single guard stood between the child and the dark. "Step aside," Ashworth said pleasantly, "and this stays quiet for everyone." Marsh did not step aside. One man, 8 feet of stone, a drowsy 9-year-old on the wrong side of him. And the clock, somewhere, still running. Ashworth studied the guard the way a man studies a stain on something expensive, with distaste, and with confidence that it could be dealt with. "You're a door guard," he said. "A good one, I'm sure. But you're one man, and you're standing in the way of a diplomatic arrangement that people considerably above your understanding have spent a very long time putting in place. There are 11 of us, and 1 of you. The princess is going for a short stay abroad as a gesture of goodwill. It's all quite properly authorized." He let the words sit. "By me. Now be sensible, and stand aside, and I'll see your obstruction tonight is remembered as a misunderstanding rather than a treason." It was, Marsh had to admit, a beautiful piece of work. Every sentence a wall. The authority, the numbers, the threat, the exit ramp, all of it built to make the man in his way feel small and wrong and alone. And it would have worked, on the door guard Ashworth thought he was talking to. "You rostered the detail down at 1900, Marsh said. His voice hadn't changed all night, and it didn't change now. "Paperwork technicality, clean on the record. You cleared the East Gate for a delegation on a courtesy list. You marked the route, Nightingale, cold." He watched Ashworth's face do a small, involuntary thing at the word. "Confirmed clear of live security. No guns on the ground between the suite and the cars. You thought of everything." "I did," Ashworth said, but a note had come into it that hadn't been there before. "You thought of everything," Marsh went on, "except why they put a nobody on this particular door 4 nights ago, on a quiet post, that happens to sit on the exact route you needed clear." The corridor went very still. "I'm not a door guard," Marsh said. "Not tonight. Not on this door." He let that land. "Royal Protection has been watching your office for 11 days, Deputy Comptroller. They didn't know the night. They didn't know the buyer. They knew there was a plan and they knew it ran through here, so they put someone on the corridor who'd recognize it when it moved. Someone the household would look straight past, because the household always looks straight past the furniture. A thin, cold thing that was almost a smile. You built a plan to beat the palace's security. You never once thought to check whether the quiet man on the door was the palace's security." Ashworth's confidence cracked, not all at once, but visibly, a fissure running up through 30 years of it. "You're bluffing. You've a radio and a wall. There's no one coming. I sent them home myself." "You sent the detail home," Marsh said. "You never had the frequency I used." He tilted his head, listening, and now the others heard it too. Under the silence, at both ends of the corridor, the sound of a great many unhurried boots. "Nightingale is not cold. That's all it took. The moment the boy dropped that folder, I told the only people in this building you couldn't reach, and they've had 11 days to be ready for exactly this. They came from both ends at once. The genuine article, moving in the disciplined quiet of people who did this for real. No shouting, no drawn spectacle, simply arriving and closing the corridor into a box. And at the gallery end, ahead of them, walking fast with his face set like stone, was Prince William. His eyes found his daughter first, drowsy, bewildered, being held by a stranger's hand, and something went across his face that was worse than any shout. Then they found Ashworth. "Nigel," William said quietly. It was almost gentle. It was the most frightening thing Marsh had heard all night. The strangers around Charlotte understood, faster than Ashworth did, that the arrangement was over, that 11 against 1 had become 11 against a building, and the building had woken up. The woman let go of Charlotte's hand. The child stumbled, and a real protection officer caught her and lifted her and turned her away from all of it before she could understand a single thing about the night she'd nearly disappeared into. And Ashworth, whose every word had been a wall, found himself for the first time in 30 years standing in a corridor with nothing left to say and no one left to say it to. It ended the way the worst things end when they're handled properly. Quietly and quickly, and without a single flashbulb. The delegation that had come to collect a princess was separated, name by name, and walked out through the same east gate they'd meant to leave through in triumph, except now with a real officer at each elbow and an empty car waiting where a full one had been planned. There was no announcement. There would be no headline. Whatever this had been meant to become between governments, it was being unmade in the dark, cleanly, before it could ever become a fact anyone would have to explain. Nigel Ashworth was taken last. He didn't struggle. Men like Ashworth never did. Struggle was for people who'd never believed the rules protected them. He simply looked, once, at the guard he'd mistaken for furniture, and whatever he was searching for in Marsh's face, an explanation, an apology, some acknowledgement of the 30 years he'd thought he'd earned, he didn't find it. Marsh gave him nothing at all. Then 2 officers walked the Deputy Comptroller of the household out of the building he'd nearly sold a child from, and the corridor was quiet again. Charlotte never understood what had happened. That was, Marsh thought, the one mercy in the whole night. A real protection officer had carried her back to her rooms before she was awake enough to be frightened, and she would remember, if she remembered anything, only that she'd had a strange dream about being woken up, and that her father had come in the middle of the night and sat with her until she fell back asleep. She would never know how close the dream had come to being the rest of her life. George knew. George would always know, and when Prince William came back down the corridor, after his daughter was safe, he went to his son first, knelt to the boy in the records room doorway where Marsh had hidden him, and held him, and told him something quiet that made the boy finally, safely, cry. Then William stood and came to Marsh. He looked at the guard for a long moment. He knew, now, what Marsh was, and what he'd nearly lost, and how close the whole thing had run. "You could have reported it up," William said. "The proper way." "The proper way ran through the man who signed it, sir," Marsh said. "There wasn't one that didn't." William nodded slowly. He understood. "My son dropped a folder at your feet," he said, "and you turned a door into a wall no one could get past. I won't forget that. Neither will she, one day, when she's old enough to be told." He paused. "Thank you, Sergeant. That word's too small. But thank you." Marsh inclined his head. He didn't know what to do with gratitude. He never had. "Just the post, sir," he said, and then they were gone. The prince, the officers, the last of it, and the administrative corridor emptied back into exactly what it had been at 7 o'clock. Polished floor, tall, dark windows, a quiet post that put younger men to sleep on their feet. Sergeant Owen Marsh squared his tunic and set the folder, the evidence, the whole horror of the night, flat and safe inside it, to be handed to the only people he trusted with it. Then he took up his position again, boots on the seam of the floor, still, unremarkable, part of the furniture of the place. Anyone passing would have seen nothing worth a second glance. They never did. That was always the point. So here's the thing about that corridor. Everyone in the palace walked past Owen Marsh for 4 nights and saw nothing. A big, quiet man on a boring door, part of the furniture, not worth a second look. Nigel Ashworth built an entire plan around that blindness. He switched off the guns, cleared the gate, marked the route cold, and thought of everything except the one man he'd already dismissed without ever really seeing. The stillness he mistook for boredom was the trap closing the whole time. So tell us, did you catch it? How many of you clocked that black folder in the very first minute and knew it mattered? And when Marsh went quiet instead of loud, when he stopped being furniture, did you already suspect the door guard wasn't what he seemed? And here's the one that stays with us. A 10-year-old boy heard his sister's name, got scared, and grabbed a folder off a desk. That's all it took. If George hadn't been brave enough to run to the nearest uniform he could find, how differently does tonight end? Would you have trusted the quiet man on the door? Drop your answer in the comments and let us know where in the world you're watching from. If this one had you holding your breath, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell so the next story finds you. Share it with someone who knows the quiet ones are the ones to watch. Then come back tomorrow, same time, because the next corridor is already waiting, and it starts with a light that should have been off.